Y'all, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I did. Had dinner with a small group of family, and that was about that. I called some bingo for some old folks. That was pretty cool. Uh, I recommend doing something like that when on Thanksgiving instead of just eating too much and sitting on your phone or taking a nap, whatever. But anyway, so tonight we're continuing on with the importance of being earnest, the life of actor Jim Varney, written by his nephew Justin Lloyd. Uh, Tonight we're gonna be reading chapter 11, and this looks like about uh, a little bit longer than the past couple, so it'll be, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes worth of reading probably, just based on what I've been doing before. So if you haven't if you haven't heard the other thing and you want to catch up, just watch the other videos that I put out called Dagwood Reads, and then because I'll probably be reading more books, so that's kind of like another show, if you will. I mean, this, it's not really a show because it's not produced too well, but anyhow, that's just like another thing that I'm doing because I'm here in the chicken coop, as I call it, my studio, and just doing some work on that, doing remodeling. It's coming along. It's a daunting task, but we're trying to make it. We're trying to spruce it up a little bit for old Phase 4, because Phase 4, I think, is when some things are gonna start coming together, and if you've actually been a follower of my content, then uh, you may not understand what I've been doing, but it'll start to make sense after a while. So I'm a patient feller, so you just stay tuned, and we're gonna start making some cool stuff. Not that I mean, I like what I've done so far, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, let's get to the book. All right, this is chapter 11, becoming Jim. Becoming Vern's favorite neighbor. All right, let me hit a little bit. All right, just let me get wet my whistle before we get started. Okay, in July 1980, the Screen Actors Guild (SAG) and the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists (AFTRA) began a strike in Hollywood when negotiations broke down over profits from the home video market, including pay TV and video cassette productions. All movie and primetime TV dramatic productions soon came to a halt. This is especially bad for Jim, as he had already been without steady work for months. There we were, me, my wife, and two sons living in Hollywood without work. Jim recalled in an interview a few years later. Excuse me. Running low on money and not knowing when the strike might end, Jim decided they should return home to Lexington. He had just over $1,000 to get his family and their belongings back to Kentucky. Through the years, Jim would repeatedly tell reporters that the strike was the reason he had left California. Lyles always thought it was a convenient excuse. Oh, yeah, if you don't remember how the last chapter ended, that was a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow there. Lyles always thought it was a convenient excuse. Despite the success Jim had experienced in California, Lyles believed Jim had never really felt like he fit in. Lyles recalls the day they drove into town from Tennessee on Highway 405 from San Diego, and seeing the Los Angeles skyline appear and stretch endlessly across the landscape. Lyles observed a noticeable change in Jim's demeanor, going from happy to subdued. that lasted his entire stay on the West Coast. I believe it. I definitely believe it. The truth was that Jim had burned a few bridges, including some at William Morris, and the word around the Comedy Store was that he had stopped growing as an artist. It seemed that Mary Warner Ford's words might be coming true. Jim had the talent, but not the discipline. It also didn't help that California was so far away from Kentucky, and all those miles made him homesick that much worse. With no real paying acting work available after moving back to Kentucky, Jim settled for a job driving a truck transporting crane parts for a company working for moving firm Vincent Pfister, Jake's husband. Jim McIntyre got him the job. Jim could never have imagined when walking out onto the stage of the Tonight Show that he would be back in Kentucky 4 years later, completely out of show business. After a month of driving a few loads to Cincinnati from Lexington, Jim decided the work was not for him. He managed to find other odd jobs such as laying tile. He did what he had in order to provide for his family. He, Jackie, and the boys lived for a short while in an A-frame in Nonsuch, Kentucky. They eventually moved in with Jackie's grandmother in Lexington. This was not how Jim, now 31, had envisioned his life on stage. Away from performing, Jim grew deeply depressed. Even though he had never hit it big in Los Angeles, he had still put it together. He had still put together quite a resume. Now he was back home in Kentucky, seemingly starting from scratch and struggling to make ends. Boy, I understand. Beginning at the age of 8, his life had been consumed with acting. His journey had taken him far beyond the regional theater circuit and nightclubs to which many people had assumed his career would be confined. In California, he had appeared on the three major networks and had rubbed elbows with many of the biggest stars in the business. To return home with no future prospects was devastating. Lyles had always thought that when Jim moved back from California, he would eventually find work again in Nashville. What he could not have predicted was that Jim would find an acting role that would bestow upon him more success, at least commercially, than he might have ever found in Los Angeles. In Bowling Green, Kentucky, country singer Ronnie Milsap had recently purchased a theme park named Beach Bend. In addition to Millsap's name recognition, the park desperately needed a boost to help it compete in places like Opryland and nearby Nashville that had larger, more modern rides and far more attractive grounds. Along with changes planned for the park itself, a new ad campaign was in the works to highlight the park's affordable activities. John Cherry and Tom Farrell, who was working with the Carden and Cherry agency as a consultant, began working with Beach Bend developing TV commercials. We developed Ernest coming back from Beach Bend in one day. It was a creative session that lasted until the wee hours of the morning, recalling Cherry in the 1980 article in the Tennessean newspaper. During my interview with Tom Farrell, he discussed in greater detail the advertising approach that led to the birth of Ernest. I had been producing commercials for Opryland as well as for Six Flags. Buster, John Cherry, and Jerry Carden called me over to discuss their new account, Beach Band. I said I would go up and scout for shooting possibilities and report my findings as to what they could do for a TV commercial. After seeing the park, I told Buster and Jerry showing the park would be a mistake at this time due to its condition. The log flume ride had algae in it. I suggested using a spokesman in some way until the improvements had been made by the new owner, Ronnie Millsap. Let me do this. I never heard of this place, I don't guess. I don't live in Kentucky either. Oh, we got people. Hey, people. Said hi. Okay. Howdy. What are you reading? I'm reading the importance of, well, it's in the thumbnail, but the importance of being earnest, the life of actor Jim Varney. So this is about Ernest P. Worrell. If you know who that is, read up. We're on chapter 11, so you got a little bit to go back. Okay. Uh, where was I? Buster and I then got together over a bunch of beers and decided on an obnoxious neighbor telling about the parks. Hence, Ernest was patterned after the warehouse employee who had worked for Buster's dad's electrical supply company. We both knew he was a pain in the ass. The neighbor, Vern, was patterned after my State Farm insurance man, Vernon, who would be less likely to want to be annoyed by Ernest. Perhaps there was a synchronicity at work. The inspiration for Vern was a man who worked for State Farm. That company's popular tagline was and is like a good neighbor. Ernest would become the ultimate annoying neighbor. After getting the premise down from the beach band ads, all that remained was finding an actor to play Ernest. According to Farrell, Jim was the first and only person considered. With Jim out of acting and living back in Kentucky, the timing could not have been better. Although Jim had no idea what the character would eventually mean to him and the culture at large, he was excited about the opportunity for paying work as an actor. Soon Jim was driving down to Nashville. Because of the limited budget, the Vernon character would essentially be played by the cameraman, with the TV audience experiencing Ernest through Vernon's point of view. In the years that followed, Ernest came to refer to Vernon just as plain Vern. Since Beach Band could not offer the same caliber of rides as Opryland, Ernest humorously and oh shit, I had a phone call. Sorry. Uh, uh, where was I? Because of the since Beach Band could not offer the same caliber of rides as Opryland, Ernest humorously highlighted the fact that a family could spend a lot less money and still have a great time. Ernest also promoted such events as the JR Look-alike Contest, inspired by the star of the hit TV show at the time, Dallas, and an appearance by the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. Oh, nice. John Cherry used his own Nashville residence to shoot the commercials after being less than impressed with the scruffy appearance of the park. The commercials ran for 5 weeks and were extremely popular, even winning awards. Although business picked up for a while, the park couldn't live up to Ernest's hype and closed shortly after. Oh, that's probably why. The commercials aired. Since Ernest had been tailored specifically for Beach Band, he was shelved for over a year. As the agency wasn't quite sure how to pitch the character to other clients, Ernest seemed destined for the same fate as Sergeant Glory until a company that had previously used the Glory character became interested in Carden and Cherry's newest Jim Varney creation. Purity Dairies of Nashville liked the way Ernest appealed to children in the Beach Bend ads and thought he was a perfect fit for selling their milk and ice cream products. In the latter part of 1981, Purity signed onto the Ernest campaign, and Jim's face was soon stretched across billboards and TV screens in Nashville. And Raleigh, North Carolina, Pine State Dairies also signed up. Meanwhile, Jim was trying to land a role in a TV series. In April 1982, he was cast in a pilot for NBC called The Show Must Go On. The hour-long show was hosted by an actor, E.G. Marshall, and focused on the behind-the-scenes trials and tribulations of a stage show. In the end, it became yet another entry in the growing list of failed TV pilots on Jim's resume. Fortunately, Jim soon had all the work he could handle shooting commercials and making public appearances for Ernest's growing list of dairy clients. With the money Ernest was beginning to bring in, Jim was finally able to afford his first house. In the summer of 1982, Jackie and the boys moved from Lexington with Jim to their new home just north of Nashville in White House, Tennessee. Ernest was now a full time job, and the family had to adjust. Well, things are looking up. After Purity and Pine State, around 3 dozen dairies in the South and Midwest soon bought into Ernest's selling power. At this point, Ernest was becoming a hot commodity. The character and his brand of humor had tapped into a seldom touched market of rural America, one especially rare for television advertising. Yet, by far, that wasn't the only place where Ernest was gaining fans. There seemed to be something about Ernest's slapstick humor that appealed to people from all walks of life. Carden and Cherry continued to win advertising awards for Ernest while pitching the character to businesses outside the dairy segment. Before long, Ernest was in 80 markets throughout the country. Hell, that's a big number. In addition to Cherry and his team of writers, many others at the agency were involved in the huge task of handling the Ernest machine. Jerry Carden, John Cherry's partner in the company, oversaw the agency's account executives. John Cherry once joked, "Jerry's got the real creative part dealing with the clients." One of the people who also dealt with his fair share of clients was Roy Littner, Vice President of Marketing. If anyone could take on the enormous task of selling Ernest, it was, or Littner, I think is what it is. He had spent most of his career working for NWA and Son, the oldest advertising agency in the country. From Boston to New York, he had worked with big companies such as Goodyear, DuPont, Chrysler, and Texaco. He retired in 1980 and moved to Nashville. After a short stint directing a television ministry campaign, Littner found himself in advertising once again. In early 1982, at the age of 60, Littner joined Carden and Cherry and was soon logging thousands of miles a year as he became an integral part of spreading Ernest across the country. Littner credits his success to clean living. Instead of hanging out in bars when he was out of town selling Ernest, he used his downtime to study up on prospective clients. Sounds like a real fun guy. He still lived by the slogan of NWAR and Son, keeping everlastingly at it brings success. His work ethic and boundless enthusiasm for Ernest proved a successful combination. Well, good for him. Although Littner and Jim technically never worked together, Jim helped Littner's efforts by being accommodating to the new clients that Roy brought to the commercial shoots. Jim and Littner got along well, and Jim enjoyed poking fun at Littner's buttoned-up demeanor. One time he gave Littner an earring as a gift. To Jim's surprise, Littner put it on. A picture of Littner sporting the earring hung on the fridge door in the kitchen at the Carden and Cherry for years. Jim continued to pursue other acting opportunities, hoping to capitalize on his recent success. One was teaming up with Farrell's production company to star in a 20-minute trailer promo called Dillard and the Devil's Music. It was a project that Farrell and Cherry had put together with a TV movie in mind. Jim played the part of an old wino, Dillard P. Simpson, who had been recruited by an angel in a battle between good and evil, where music was used to lure souls. Oh, I like it. Dillard was made to perform his duties while living a genie-like existence inside an old beer can. I like it. After a struggling young musician comes across the can on a street, he soon meets Dillard, who offers him assistance. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of that project. Man, I'd like to see that, honestly. In the fall of 1982, Jim landed his first TV series since the failed Pink Lady. He was cast as a regular in the half-hour country music variety series Tom T. Hall's Pop Goes the Country in Nashville. Wow, that's a hell of a. All right. Country music singer songwriter Hall had recently taken over a host from noted country DJ Ralph Emery. A change reflected in the show's title, which had previously just been Pop. Oh, Pop Goes the Country. Oh, okay, okay. The whole title makes a little more sense, but geez, that's a hell of a mouthful. The show's tapings had moved from Opera House to Opryland, USA's Gaslight Theater, and the set was made over with a nightclub feel. The main character Jim portrayed was a totally cool California hipster named Bobby Burbank. Bobby, like Ernest, believed he was much cooler than he actually was, and usually found himself the butt of the joke. In addition, Jim was able to introduce some of his stand up characters to a new audience, such as his sassy southern beauty queen, Bunny Jeanette. He wore bright blue eye makeup, thick red lipstick, and a big blonde curly wig when portraying Bunny as a cocktail waitress. In just a few years since the actor's strike, Jim's career was back on track. While not following the path he had originally dreamed of, he was finding consistent work as an actor and making enough money to provide for his family. Jim's aspirations of becoming a touted character actor once again felt within reach. Can I have a shout out? I'm the boy person. Oh, well, there's your shout out. Uh, Owen Wolf. There you go. All right. Let me wet. That was a good. That was a good break. I'll wet my whistle on that. All right. Uh, but before the 26 taped episodes of Pop Goes the Country, featuring Jim, could air, legal issues had to be worked out. Jim had recently filed suit against his new agent, Aubrey Mayhew, who had been representing him since January 1981. Jim wanted to void his contract on the grounds of non performance. He claimed that Mayhew had not lived up to many of the promises he had originally made. Lyle says Jim told him that Mayhew wanted Jim to perform stand up wherever he happened to locate a gig, no matter where it was. That was not the type of career boosting work Jim had envisioned when signing with Mayhew, who had started Little Darlin' Records in the 60s and launched the career of country singer Johnny Paycheck and other artists. Oh, I like Johnny Paycheck. Mayhew countersued, arguing that Jim refused or neglected to come to Nashville from Lexington for the purpose of recording and preparing him for his career. In addition, Mayhew wanted 50% of Jim's income from his commercial and TV appearances, including Purity, Carton, and Cherry and Showbiz, the company that distributed Tom T's Pop Goes the Country Club, in his cross complaint. Both sides eventually settled with Jim being ordered to pay Mayhew back the $2,000 that Mayhew had loaned him at the beginning of their association. Betty Clark, whose Nashville talent agency had worked with Jim the previous 10 years, soon took over Jim's manager. Well, that's cool. He kind of got out of it. What are you reading? Well, again, it's in the description and in the thumbnail, but it's the importance of being earnest. It's the life of Jim Varney. It's written by his nephew, Justin Lloyd. All right. So, where am I? Nashville. Meanwhile, Jim continued to do stand up at clubs in around Nashville. His wife Jackie helped write many of the routines and sometimes joined him on stage at the famous Bluebird Cafe. The two performed what Jackie joked was kind of a Benny Hillbilly show, like Benny Hill. I get it. Oh yeah, you got it. You're welcome, Owen Wolf. Uh, at Benny Hillbilly Show. One of their acts was a parody on the life and times of Mr. and Mrs. Marlin Perkins. Marlin Perkins was the host of the long running TV show Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. The next opportunity for acting came in 1983 when Jim was offered a role on a new TV show for NBC called The Rousters. Jim's character, Evan Earp, and his brother, Wyatt Earp III, played by Chad Everett of the beloved TV series Medical Center, were great grandsons of Wyatt Earp, the famous gunfighter of the American West. In the show, Wyatt works as a bouncer for a traveling carnival while his gun toting mother attempts to keep the family's violent legacy alive by finding work as a bounty hunter. The Rousters was that's a cool concept. Uh, uh, the Rousters was one of many TV shows from the late legendary TV producer Stephen J. Cannell, whose long list of hits included The Rockford Files, Beretta, The Greatest American Hero, and later The A-Team. Okay, so he does know how to write something, or conceptualize something, I should say. And 21 Jump Street. According to Joe Swirling Jr., executive producer of The Rousters, when Cannell wrote the pilot, he wrote the role of Evan for Varney after seeing his tapes, with a cast that included other noted actors such as Mimi Rogers and Hoyt Axton. Hopes were high that it could be another Cannell hit. The Rousters pilot was taped in April, and in May, NBC added it to their fall schedule. Jim was surprised and excited to hear the news. He planned a temporary move to Los Angeles over the summer with Jackie and the boys. He wanted them close by while he worked. Jim had come to love his stepsons as if they were his own flesh and blood. I'm gonna hit this bear. All right. During the show's short run, it was preempted twice and shifted to different nights, which took a toll on ratings. Even though Jim thought it was a quality show, it didn't make it past the first season. Man, I should look that up. I'd like to see it, just to take a look. It sounds funny. The demands of filming an hour-long TV show were immense. It was the most grueling work schedule Jim had ever experienced professionally. Jackie and the boys had ended up remaining at home in Tennessee during his time shooting. The long stretches away from family proved too great a strain on the marriage, and Jackie asked for a divorce. Bummer. Jim was devastated, having thought so many of his struggles were behind him. Yet he barely had time to dwell on the divorce or his canceled show, as the Ernest clients kept growing. Well, bury yourself in your work, I guess. I've been through a divorce once. I was a young man, and, it's good that he had something to do. The character was becoming a household name. Jim had actually been flying back and forth from Los Angeles to Nashville during the shooting of The Rousters to keep the Ernest commercials going. Back in Jim's hometown, everyone was reading about his latest successes in the Lexington Herald Leader. Reporters from the paper interviewed him many times. In one piece, Jim spoke of his newfound stardom and gave insight into what drove him as an actor. He said, "I never really wanted to be a star, though. I think that term is badly overused. I just wanted to act and entertain people." Jim also discussed his long-held desire of doing serious acting, perhaps even playing a villain. Jim's mother was interviewed for one story and remarked, "He looked so funny as Ernest, and that's kind of strange to think that he used to do Shakespeare." Lexington was also enjoying his first glimpse of Jim as Ernest, as his convenient food mart commercials began playing in the area. Les Beausset, advertising director for Convenience Parent Company, Kona Corp of Louisiana, said then, "It's possibly the best advertising campaign we've ever had. Look, like so many clients of Cardin and Cherry, Kona Corp, these names, received countless letters asking who Ernest was and how many more commercials were set to air." In March 1984, the Kentucky State Senate passed a resolution honoring Jim. His father accompanied him to Frankfort, where senators gave him a standing ovation. The Woodford Sun, a nearby newspaper, covered the event and printed a photo of Jim and his father meeting Governor Martha Lane Collins. Jim's father carried a copy of that newspaper photo folded up in his billfold until the day he died. To have such an honor bestowed on his son obviously made him proud. I'm happy for him. And perhaps served as validation of the type of man he had always hoped Jim would become. That's nice. Jim's celebrity status was gaining him invitations to a variety of social functions, including prominent ones in his home state. Beginning in the 1950s, Hamburg Place, the noted horse farm, was the site of the famous Derby Eve party thrown every year by owner socialite Anita Madden and her husband. The star-studded parties were always exhibitions of southern opulence and then some. Many had themes such as Rapture of the Deep and Ultimate Odyssey. That sounds pretentious as shit. Which featured males and females dressed as Greek gods. Yeah. In May 1984, Jim was a celebrity guest at the event held on the same grounds where he had once parked cars for his father and where his grandfather had once worked as a horseman and gardener. Although Jim was understandably popular in Lexington and in Nashville, other states were just as crazy over him. In truth, Ernest was going viral, appealing to the country's blue-collar uh, people with southern roots, and anyone else who appreciated Ernest's kooky down-home style. A Tulsa, Oklahoma TV station where Ernest's commercials aired for Brahms groceries had to go to special lengths to deal with the flood of phone calls about Ernest. The station actually ran a special message on the screen early each morning to inform viewers of the times the commercials would air. Oh, wow. That's cool. I mean, that ain't happening nowadays, I'll tell you that. Customers at a Brahms market in Choctaw, Oklahoma, which had served as a shooting location for an Ernest commercial, would act out scenes from the commercial film there. It involved Ernest taking cottage cheese from the dairy case and dancing with it while approaching the checkout counter. In another much loved commercial, Ernest climbs on the top of Vern's ladder. Pushy Ernest interrupts Vern, who is on the roof, to tell him about the latest product he needs to buy. Vern doesn't respond but just kicks out the ladder. I've seen this one. Sending Ernest falling backward into the yard. Many of Ernest's intrusions left Jim with bumps, bruises, even burns. Another popular commercial shows Ernest interrupting Vern's outdoor cookout by hovering over his grill and giving him his usual unwarranted advice. Vern, again, always a man of few words, doesn't bother to tell Ernest about the grill being hot and gets the last laugh when Ernest leans on it and it's scorched. I love Ernest commercials, man. Just hearing them even lettered out in a book, man, it's funny. As the interest in Ernest continued to take on a life of its own, a TV special centering on the character and his backstory seemed fitting. The result, a 1-hour syndicated TV special called Hey Vern, It's My Family Album, originally referred to in some news articles as the Ernest and Vern Comedy Special. The show was filmed in Nashville during the spring of 1984, consisting of 6 sketches. Each introduced by Ernest, the special highlighted some of his peculiar family members. One member it didn't feature was Edna, a woman Ernest occasionally mentioned in the commercials. She, like Vern, was always off screen. Uh, Viewers were led to assume that she was likely his wife. Authors note, apart from having family album in their titles, there is virtually no similarity between this special and the variety show Joe Lyles pitched in the late 1970s. I remember that from the earlier chapters. Huh. Okay. Because I think I even said in the earlier chapters that I'd seen that or whatever, but apparently they weren't nothing like it. So okay. Unless Jim mentioned it to them, I believe it is doubtful any of the Ernest writers knew of its existence. Wow. Synchronicity, I guess. In each sketch of the show, Jim portrays humorous characters outside of Ernest. Many people thought some of them were funnier than Ernest. One is Lloyd Worrell, adapted from his stand up character Lloyd Rowe, along with a second I added to his first name. Lloyd's last name has been changed and the character reinvented as Ernest's great uncle. Ernest claims, as Jim did in his stand up routine, that Lloyd is the meanest man in the world. In the special, the distinction is even stated on Lloyd's dilapidated mailbox, which reads, Lloyd Worrell, MMW, meanest man in the world, was written just below it. In the show, Jim plays the part of Lloyd in full costume and makeup. His clothing is ragged, resembling that worn by Jed Clampett, TV hillbilly billionaire. In this version, with missing teeth and hunched over stance, Lloyd is more downtrodden than his stand-up character, but still mean as a snake. In the skit, Lloyd has a wife named Ruth along with a son, Mistake. They live in a rural ramshackle house surrounded by a yard littered with scrap. The family is so poor they actually pretend to eat. Lloyd sits at a table and Ruth brings him an empty plate and he takes a knife and fork and begins to cut into his imaginary steak after telling his wife he had been looking forward to eating lobster. Even when escaping into the momentary comfort of an imaginary world, poor old Lloyd still ends up deprived. Charlie Chaplin had explored the idea of starvation-induced lunacy nearly 60 years earlier in the silent film The Gold Rush. In it, Chaplin's gold prospector character becomes so hungry that he resorts to boiling his right shoe on the stove. After sitting down at the table to eat his leather entree, he has to fight off fellow prospector Big Jim for what they both think is the most appetizing part. Meanwhile, after getting his fill of make-believe steak, Lloyd's foul mood returns. His son Mistake becomes the focus of Lloyd's physical and verbal assaults. A full-grown man, much larger than Jim portrays 8-year-old Mistake, being far too big a boy for Lloyd to administer corporal punishment, Lloyd concludes that the best way to keep his son under control is to work on him psychologically. It's spelled out phonetically. One has to question, though, just how effective anyone who pretends to eat will be using psychology to influence somebody else. I remember this skit. I've actually been quoting this skit. There once was a boy named Mistake, and he fell off the edge of the earth and mashed his finger. Yeah, I mean that I know this skit pretty well, or at least parts of it or whatever. I'm sure there's different bits, whatever. But I know this. After let me get this. After Mistake's initial hesitation, Lloyd convinces him that it's time for bed. Once Mistake is tucked in, Lloyd proceeds to read him a bedtime story from the Yellow Pages, referring to it as the Big Book. I totally remember these things. Lloyd quotes entries as it were the Bible. He goes on to read to Mistake a supposedly prophetic bedtime story about the boy's life that concludes with Mistake falling off the edge of the world, yeah, and mashing his finger. Mistake gets the last laugh when he grabs a toy, a boulder-sized rock, from behind his bed and hurls it at Lloyd, smashing his father into the wall. Man, I remember it well. The show aired in the 80 or so markets across the country where Ernest ads were already popular. The Ernest clients in those markets benefited from the added exposure of their star salesman. Although the special was clearly a vehicle promoting Ernest, he also resembled something of a demo reel of characters that Jim hoped might catch the eye of a TV or movie producer. In Nashville, Ernest's home base, a special premiere was held at the Tennessee State Fairgrounds. Fans were treated to fancy appetizers such as cream-filled patty cakes and goo-goo clusters, served with milk and orange juice. Jim, dressed as Ernest, arrived fittingly on a Nashville Metro bus. Ernest was now moving into so many markets, it was inevitable that the story of the character's success would reach the national scene. In 1984, two of the three major networks shined a spotlight on the advertising phenomenon, Dan Rather and the CBS Evening News. I mean, considering I'm laughing at this thing that happened. This all happened way before. I mean, I guess, just things in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. They had more staying power. I mean, in today's kind of society and stuff like that, like to see something that happened 10 years, prior, that's just it's just kind of unheard of now. Like everything is just kind of like on to the new because everything's kind of bland, so because everything's kind of bland, you just got to move on to the new thing. But in the 80s and 90s and stuff, there was a lot of really good content. We didn't even use that word, but I mean, not like we do today. But it had staying power. Ernest is one of those things. He's got staying power because it's good. Um, Ernest was now moving into so many markets, it was inevitable that the story of the character's success would reach the national scene. In 1984, two of the three major networks shined a spotlight on the advertising phenomenon. Dan Rather and the CBS Evening News covered the Ernest craze and did a follow-up story the following year. In the second piece were commercial clips, behind-the-scenes footage, interview segments with Jim and John Cherry, and a look at the variety of Ernest merchandise Jim's popularity had spawned. One of the funniest moments was a clip of Ernest making an appearance at the Clemson football game with a male police officer rushed onto the field to kiss him on the cheek. The last commercial shown on the CBS story must have gotten to Rather, who was watching the pre-recorded segment from his desk. Vern's hands were seen opening a heart-shaped box of chocolates only to find Ernest's face protruding out of the center. Ernest, alternating between looking at the camera and looking at his right towards some of the chocolate, says, "Be mine, Vern." Remember this commercial. "Hand me that caramel." As Rather returned on camera, his eyes were watering and confessed, laughing, "We lose it sometimes. We're losing it now." That's a funny commercial. I remember it. I remember seeing outtakes of it. On ABC's Good Morning America, Jim enjoyed the rare opportunity to participate in a nationally aired live studio interview, appearing as himself, dressed in a sweater with a dress shirt collar exposed. Jim sat across from his host, Joan London. Joan London. Much of Jim's warmth and charm came across, and he actually appeared slightly shy and somewhat reserved, as many comedians do when they're not in character. But it may have had as much to do with London's movie star looks as it did with Jim's appearing live in front of a national audience. In March 1985, Ernest finally landed on the third major network when Tom Brokaw covered the Ernest craze on the NBC Nightly News. The introduction to the segment showed Jim in full Shakespeare attire, reciting lines on an empty stage. That was followed with the story of Ernest's rise to fame and continued popularity. The segment concluded by returning to Jim reciting Shakespeare, in what may be one of the funniest screen moments of Jim's career. He turned to the camera after delivering the line from Hamlet and said, "You know what I mean, Vern?" It was all Brokaw could do to keep a straight face as he could said goodnight to viewers. Oh, that's cute. Well, all right, guys, that is the end of chapter 11. We'll be doing chapter 12, next week because we're still working on the studio here. So we're just gonna be reading this book, up until the new year. All right, y'all, take care. Happy Thanksgiving.